The room was eerily silent, only the soft hum of the fan breaking the stillness as it attempted to cool the increasingly heavy air. Taehyung sat alone in the corner of the dressing room, his body stiff, his gaze fixed on the screen of his phone. The message on the screen was too real, too devastating to process. "Your father has passed away. I'm sorry." His hands trembled as he touched the phone screen, trying to hold back the torrent of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. His tears fell, one by one, silently down his cheeks. The others were busy preparing for the concert, the crew running around, managing last-minute details. They had no idea that Taehyung's world had just shattered. Jungkook stood in the doorway, watching from a distance. He'd noticed Taehyung's unusual silence for the past few weeks, but tonight something felt different. Something was wrong as he walked toward him, his footsteps echoing softly on the floor. Taehyung still didn't respond, his eyes still locked on his phone, his expression void of emotion. Jungkook stopped in front of him and called out quietly, "Taehyung, are you okay?" Taehyung didn't answer. He only took a long breath, pressing his phone against his palm, as if it could somehow stop the world from spinning around him. The manager walked in, looking flustered but also composed, as if the show must go on. "Taehyung, we need to get to the stage. The tickets are all sold. The crew is ready. We can't cancel now." Jungkook glanced at the manager, his gaze sharp, his words steady. "Manager, this isn't about the concert," Jungkook said, his voice quiet but firm. "This is about family." The manager opened his mouth to argue, but Jungkook raised a hand to stop him. "If Taehyung isn't allowed to go home today, I won't be stepping on that stage either." The room went dead silent. The manager froze, clearly taken aback by Jungkook's words. Jungkook, the ever-dedicated member, the one who would never let the team down, was now making an ultimatum. "Jungkook," the manager said, his voice low, almost pleading. "You know what this means, right? We've practiced for months. The fans are waiting. This is bigger than all of us. But this is about life, not a performance." Jungkook replied, his voice unwavering. "Family comes first." That one sentence rocked the entire production. It was as though the world had stopped moving. An hour later, everything ground to a halt. The crew, bewildered, didn't know what to do. What was happening? Why was everything stopping? Taehyung was called out by the manager, who told him he could go home. No explanations, no apologies, just permission. He nodded, still dazed, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just transpired. Taehyung stood there, his phone buzzed again. Another message. He opened it, his heart skipping a beat. It was from Jungkook. "Hyung, family is more important than the stage. I'll wait for you here whenever you come back." Taehyung paused, reading the message over and over. What did this mean? It was a simple message, but it carried so much weight. Lately, their relationship had felt distant, strained even. But this was different. Jungkook, who had always been distant, always the strong one, was showing a side of himself Taehyung had never expected to see. Taehyung stood there for a moment, staring at the large stage doors in front of him. The crew was preparing. The fans were waiting outside. It all felt so far away now, so irrelevant in the face of the loss he had just experienced. But one thing was clear now. Jungkook had done something no one else would. He put family above everything else. And sometimes a single sentence was enough to change everything. The air in the dressing room felt like it was closing in around Taehyung. He stood frozen by the door, his phone still clutched tightly in his hand, the message from Jungkook echoing in his mind. "I'll wait for you here whenever you come back." The words felt like a lifeline, but also a reminder of how much had been left unsaid between them. Jungkook had always been distant. No, that wasn't it. He had always been guarded. There had been moments, flashes, where Taehyung could almost feel the warmth between them, but those moments were rare. And now, after everything that had happened, was this some kind of apology? Was Jungkook trying to fix something that Taehyung wasn't even sure had ever been broken? He looked back at the crew, still bustling around in their usual pre-concert frenzy. Their world, their bright lights and loud music, felt like a distant echo now. How could he possibly stand on that stage with everything happening inside him? "Taehyung," the manager's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him back into reality. "You should go now. It's best if you leave immediately." Taehyung nodded without saying anything, the lump in his throat growing. His steps were slow as he made his way out of the room. But as soon as he stepped into the hallway, the weight of his emotions threatened to crush him. He couldn't cry in front of anyone, couldn't show them that he was breaking inside. No, he had to keep moving, keep pretending. But just as he reached the elevator, a hand grabbed his wrist. He turned to find Jungkook standing there, looking at him with an intensity that caught him off guard. "I'm coming with you," Jungkook said, his voice low but resolute. "Let's go together." Taehyung shook his head, almost instinctively pulling away. "No, you can't." "The concert," his voice faltered, but Jungkook was already shaking his head. "I don't care about the concert, Hyung." His words were firm, like he had already made up his mind. "I care about you." Taehyung felt his heart skip a beat. The vulnerability in Jungkook's eyes was something he hadn't seen in years. Maybe never, not like this. The thought that Jungkook would choose him over the concert, over everything they had worked for, it was overwhelming. "I'll be fine, Jungkook," Taehyung said softly, his gaze falling to the floor. "You have a show to do. You don't have to worry about me." Jungkook stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I'm not worried about the show. I'm worried about you." Taehyung's breath caught in his throat. "But what about your fans? Your schedule?" "I don't care," Jungkook answered with a quiet intensity. "None of that matters if you're not okay. Let's go, Hyung. I'll go with you. You're not alone in this." For a moment, Taehyung stood still, torn between the overwhelming emotions crashing inside him and the reality of the stage waiting for him. But Jungkook's unwavering presence, his insistence, was something Taehyung couldn't ignore. Without another word, he nodded, and together they left the building, walking into the unknown night outside. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if everything had paused just for them. The drive was a blur. Taehyung stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks as the car sped through the streets. The hum of the engine was the only sound, but in his head there was a storm. Jungkook sat next to him, silent but present, his gaze occasionally flicking to Taehyung. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His quiet presence was enough to make Taehyung feel like he wasn't alone, like he didn't have to face everything by himself. Taehyung had always kept his distance from people, especially from Jungkook. It wasn't out of dislike, but because he wasn't sure how to bridge the growing gap between them. Their friendship, which had once been so effortless, had started to slip away slowly, almost imperceptibly. The tension between them had built over time, and neither of them had known how to fix it. But now, with everything that had happened with his father, the walls he had carefully constructed around himself were beginning to crumble. And Jungkook, who had always kept his emotions carefully hidden behind his sharp focus and professional demeanor, was now the one breaking through. "Why did you do it?" Taehyung's voice cracked, his gaze still fixed outside the window. "You could have just let me go and stayed behind. The show, the fans, everything." Jungkook didn't answer right away, his eyes still focused on the road. He seemed to be considering his words carefully. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke, his voice soft but steady. "Because I couldn't stand the idea of you going through this alone." Jungkook's voice was surprisingly gentle, stripped of the usual edge. "I've seen how much you've carried on your own, Taehyung. You don't have to do it anymore. Not if you don't want to." Taehyung's heart tightened. He wanted to say something, to tell Jungkook that he had always been fine, that he didn't need anyone. But the words wouldn't come. For the first time in a long while, he realized that maybe he didn't need someone. Maybe, for once, he didn't have to carry everything by himself. The car arrived at the small apartment where Taehyung had grown up. The familiar, quiet neighborhood looked unchanged, almost surreal in the stillness of the night. Taehyung felt a pang in his chest as he stepped out of the car. His father's passing had not only taken away a piece of his heart, but also a part of his past. The life he had known was now forever altered. Jungkook followed Taehyung up the stairs, close but not intruding. He didn't need to say anything more. He just let Taehyung lead, his presence like a comforting shadow behind him. Inside, the apartment was just as Taehyung remembered. Faded wallpaper, pictures of his family on the walls, and the faint smell of incense lingering in the air. His father's presence was everywhere, Taehyung walked toward the living room, his eyes scanning the familiar space. He didn't know what to do next. How was he supposed to face this? How was he supposed to feel? Jungkook stood by the door, watching him. He didn't want to crowd Taehyung, but at the same time, he didn't want to leave him alone in this moment. The tension between them hung in the air like a thick fog. "I don't know how to do this," Taehyung whispered, his voice trembling. Jungkook took a step forward, closing the distance between them. He placed a hand gently on Taehyung's shoulder, his touch warm and steady. "You don't have to do anything right now," Jungkook said softly. "Just breathe. You don't have to be strong for anyone else. Just be yourself." Taehyung closed his eyes, taking in Jungkook's words. It had been so long since anyone had told him that. For years, he had carried the weight of everyone's expectations. The band, the fans, his family. But now, in this quiet apartment, with Jungkook standing beside him, he realized he didn't have to carry it alone anymore. For the first time in a long time, Taehyung felt like he could let go. The flood of emotions he had been holding back for so long began to break through. He didn't care if Jungkook saw his tears. It didn't matter anymore. "I'm sorry," Taehyung murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "I've been so distant. I didn't mean to push you away." Jungkook's grip on his shoulder tightened, offering the silent reassurance that Taehyung desperately needed. "You don't have to apologize for anything, Hyung. I'm here for you. Always." For a long moment, they stood there in silence, and it was as if the world outside no longer mattered. For once, it was just the two of them, letting go of everything that had been holding them back. The morning after was a blur. Taehyung awoke to the dull gray light filtering through the apartment's thin curtains. The world outside was calm, quiet, almost indifferent to the storm he felt brewing inside. Jungkook was already up, sitting at the small kitchen table with a cup of coffee in his hands. His eyes met Taehyung's when he walked into the room, but he didn't say anything at first. It was as if he could sense the weight of Taehyung's thoughts, the hesitation in his every step. Taehyung hadn't slept much. The hours had dragged on as he lay in the dark, listening to the sound of his own breathing, feeling the suffocating silence of the apartment that had once been full of life. His father's presence lingered in every corner, but now it felt like a ghost, a shadow that he couldn't escape. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Jungkook spoke. "You don't have to do anything today. You can take your time." Taehyung nodded without a word, walking to the kitchen counter to pour himself a cup of water. He hadn't realized how dry his mouth had become. The weight of everything still hung over him. His father's death, the unfinished conversations, the guilt that clung to him like a second skin. And then there was Jungkook standing by, offering quiet support in ways Taehyung couldn't fully understand. He looked over at Jungkook, who was still watching him with that unreadable expression. "I didn't ask you to come, Jungkook. I didn't need anyone." The words came out sharper than he intended, his frustration bubbling to the surface. He couldn't help it. It felt like his entire life had been a series of obligations. People expecting things from him, asking him to be something he wasn't. Jungkook didn't flinch. He simply set his cup down and stood up, walking over to Taehyung. There was no anger in his eyes, no judgment, just a quiet understanding. "You don't need to ask, Taehyung," Jungkook said softly. "I came because I wanted to. You don't have to be alone, even if you think you do." Taehyung opened his mouth to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. He didn't know how to explain it. Didn't know how to make Jungkook understand that sometimes being around people, especially people who cared, only made things harder. He didn't want anyone to see him like this, broken and vulnerable. But Jungkook wasn't letting him pull away this time. He stepped closer, and before Taehyung could step back, Jungkook gently cupped his face in his hands. "Let me be here for you," Jungkook whispered. "You don't have to do this on your own." The touch, though simple, was enough to crack the wall Taehyung had spent years building around himself. The floodgates that he had kept locked inside burst open, and he let out a shaky breath, his hands trembling as they reached for Jungkook's arms. "I don't know what to do anymore." "Jungkook," Taehyung said, his voice breaking. "Everything feels so wrong. I don't know how to fix it." Jungkook didn't have an answer. He didn't promise that everything would be okay, or that there was an easy way out. But he didn't need to. His steady presence was enough to calm the storm inside Taehyung. "I'm not going anywhere," Jungkook said, his voice firm. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. I'll be here when you're ready to talk." For a long moment, they just stood there, the weight of the situation hanging in the air between them. Taehyung wasn't sure what would happen next. He wasn't sure if he could ever go back to the way things were before his father died, before the walls between him and Jungkook grew so high. But in that moment, he realized something important. He didn't need to have everything figured out. He didn't have to be the perfect son, the perfect friend, the perfect idol. He only needed to let himself feel, to let the pain wash over him and trust that maybe he didn't have to do it alone anymore. The days that followed were a blur of restless nights and quiet mornings. Taehyung had taken a leave from the band's schedule, leaving Jungkook to shoulder the burden of performing alone. At first, the silence between them was palpable, an unspoken understanding that they were both grieving, yet unable to bridge the gap between them. Jungkook, despite his quiet demeanor, had stayed by Taehyung's side, his presence a steady force that on the third day, as the funeral preparations loomed over him, Taehyung found himself in the living room, staring at old photographs of his father. He hadn't realized how much he had shut away, how much he had tried to avoid the truth of his family's past. But now, in the stillness, it was impossible to ignore. Jungkook, who had been quietly making tea in the kitchen, stepped into the room. His presence was like a gentle hand on Taehyung's shoulder. "It's okay to let it out," Jungkook said quietly, sitting beside him. Taehyung shook his head, his chest tightening. "I don't know how to grieve, Jungkook. I've spent so long pretending it didn't matter, pretending that I could move on without facing all of this. I don't know how to fix what's broken." Jungkook didn't speak immediately, his gaze softening. Finally, he spoke in a calm, grounded tone. "You don't have to fix anything right now. You just have to feel. Grief isn't something you fix, Hyung. It's something you live through." The words hung in the air between them, settling into Taehyung's mind. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel the need to have it all together. He didn't have to be strong. Not for the world. Not for anyone. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave for the funeral, Taehyung's phone buzzed with a message from his manager. The band was scheduled to meet the following day, the weight of their expectations heavy. "You have to get back on the schedule soon, Taehyung," the message said. "We can't keep delaying things. Fans are waiting." Taehyung stared at the message, the anger and frustration welling up again. He hadn't even had time to grieve, to process his father's death. The business of being an idol, the unyielding pressure, it felt suffocating. Jungkook noticed a shift in his expression. "You don't have to do it right away. We'll figure out," he said, the quiet reassurance in his voice offering Taehyung some comfort. But Taehyung knew that the choice wasn't his to make. The band, the company, the fans, they would all demand his return. And yet, in that moment, the weight of their expectations seemed distant. What was the point of being an idol, of singing on a stage, when the person you were at your core felt so far from what everyone expected you to be? As they drove to the funeral, the road felt longer than it ever had. Taehyung glanced at Jungkook, who was quietly staring out of the window. For a brief moment, he felt a quiet peace knowing that he wasn't alone. But that peace was fleeting. At the funeral, Taehyung faced his family, the grief in their eyes matching his own. The tears flowed freely, and for the first time, he allowed himself to mourn. But even as he did, he felt the weight of his past and future colliding. His father was gone, and the life he had once known was slipping away. That night, after the ceremony, Jungkook quietly approached him. "I'll stay as long as you need me, Hyung," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Taehyung nodded, his heart heavy. "I don't know what I need right now, but thank you, Jungkook, for everything." Jungkook gave a small smile, a silent promise that he wouldn't leave, no matter how broken Taehyung felt. The pressure was mounting, and Taehyung felt himself at the edge of a breaking point. Despite the support from Jungkook, the relentless demands of his career kept pulling him back into the cold, rigid world of stardom. He had avoided returning to the stage for weeks, but the messages from his manager were unyielding. "Fans are waiting. The schedule won't wait." It was suffocating. One night, Taehyung stood before the mirror, rehearsing his lines for the upcoming performance. He didn't recognize the man staring back at him. The person who had once dreamed of performing for his fans, who had thrived under the spotlight, now seemed distant, as though he were wearing someone else's face. Jungkook stood by the door, watching him. He had been quiet for days, sensing that something was breaking inside Taehyung. But he couldn't stay silent any longer. "Hyung," Jungkook began, his voice soft but firm, "you don't have to do this if you're not ready." Taehyung turned to him, eyes filled with frustration and exhaustion. "I don't have a choice, Jungkook. This isn't about me anymore. It's about the fans, the company, the band." His voice trailed off, as if the words no longer made sense. Jungkook stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "What about you? What about your needs, Taehyung? You've been ignoring them for too long." Taehyung flinched, his heart aching. "I've already lost so much. I can't afford to lose this too." For a moment, there was silence, the weight of those words hanging in the air. Jungkook reached out, placing a hand on Taehyung's shoulder, grounding him. "Hyung, this isn't about losing anything. It's about healing. You can't keep pushing it all down, thinking you can handle alone." Jungkook's voice softened, his concern evident. "You've been running for so long. It's time to stop." Taehyung stared at him, torn. But something in Jungkook's words broke through the numbness. The years of suppressing his emotions, of being the idol everyone expected him to be, had taken their toll. He realized, with growing clarity, that he wasn't ready to return to the stage. Not until he had healed, until he had allowed himself to feel. That night, Taehyung made a decision. He called his manager and requested more time off. He wasn't ready to face the cameras, the stage, or the fans yet. It wasn't just about the performance. It was about finding himself again. Jungkook, ever the silent pillar, stood beside him through it all. When Taehyung made the call, Jungkook's presence was a quiet reassurance that he wouldn't have to face the consequences alone. The tension in the room was suffocating. Taehyung's phone had just hung up, the words of the CEO still echoing in his mind. "Your absence is affecting the group. Fans are questioning your commitment." Each word pierced deeper than he expected. His career, his identity, the future he had spent years building, all seemed to hang by a thread. He looked up at Jungkook, who had been silent, watching him carefully as if waiting for the moment Taehyung would make a decision. Taehyung could feel the weight of the choice pressing on him. Should he go back to work, push through the grief and pressure, or should he take control of his life, even if it meant risking everything? The familiar feeling of suffocation returned. The world outside was demanding, but inside, he was crumbling. That Jungkook's voice cut through the silence. "You don't have to choose them, Taehyung. You don't have to choose the stage. You can choose yourself." Taehyung's heart clenched. He wanted to choose himself. He wanted to feel whole again, to heal, to grieve for his father without the pressure of being perfect. But the thought of disappointing the fans, his band, and the company, it hurt. It made him question everything. "I don't know if I can just walk away from all this," Taehyung whispered, his voice breaking. "Everything's been built on this career, this image. If I step back now, I'll lose everything." Jungkook moved closer, his presence calm but unwavering. "No, you won't lose everything. What you've built is important, but it doesn't define you. Your worth isn't tied to what the world expects from you. It's okay to not be okay. You're allowed to take the time you need. And when you're ready, the stage will still be there." Taehyung felt tears prick at his eyes, but this time, he didn't hold them back. The dam he had built for so long had finally cracked. He hadn't realized how much pressure he had been carrying until now. The grief, the expectations, the fear of letting people down, it had been too much. "I've been so afraid of disappointing people," Taehyung admitted, his voice shaking. "But in the end, I've been disappointing myself. I've been so focused on what everyone else wanted that I forgot what I need." Jungkook gave a soft smile, stepping forward to wrap Taehyung in a quiet embrace. "It's not easy to let go, but you're not alone in this. Whatever you decide, I'm here." For a long moment, they stood there, the weight of unspoken understanding passing between them. Jungkook's steady presence anchored Taehyung, grounding him in the reality that healing, not perfection, was the path forward, As Taehyung pulled away, he wiped his eyes, finally feeling the release he hadn't allowed himself before. I need time, Jungkook. I'm going to step back, take care of myself, and figure things out. I'll figure out who I am without the mask of being Taehyung the idol. Jungkook nodded, his expression unwavering. That's the right choice. The decision wasn't easy. It would be a long road ahead. But in that moment, Taehyung finally felt a sense of peace. He didn't need to have all the answers. He just needed to take a step back and allow himself the space to heal, away from the demands of the stage, away from the expectations of others.